The polished teak of the dock was warm under the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the ice forming in Julian's veins. He stood a few feet from the gleaming white gangplank of the Serenity, a vessel so flawlessly designed it seemed less built and more born from the sea itself. Its lines were a symphony of hydrodynamic grace and aesthetic perfection, a floating testament to what was possible when ambition met unlimited resources. It was, in every curve and every metallic glint, his masterpiece. His wife's family, the Ashworths, saw only the resources. "Julian, really, step back," Marcus Ashworth, his father-in-law, said with the weary sigh of a man swatting away a persistent fly. Marcus had the florid, self-satisfied face of someone who had been successful enough, long enough ago, to forget the feeling of struggle. "The charter company is very strict about the guest list. Insurance, you understand." Blake, Chloe's brother, snickered. He was a younger, sharper, and more odious version of his father, dressed in linen shorts and a pastel polo shirt that screamed generational wealth. "Yeah, Julian, wouldn't want you to trip on the expensive rope. Your kind of shoes probably don't have much grip." He gestured with his chin at Julian's simple leather loafers. They were handmade Italian shoes that cost more than Blake's entire outfit, but their elegance was in their understatement, a concept as foreign to Blake as humility. Julian said nothing. He looked at his wife Chloe, who stood beside her mother Eleanor, already halfway up the gangplank. Chloe's eyes, the color of a summer sky, darted towards him, filled with a familiar, helpless apology. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a silent plea for him to just accept it, to not make a scene. Her silence was the cruelest cut of all. Eleanor, draped in a silk caftan that fluttered in the sea breeze, adjusted her oversized sunglasses. "Marcus is right, dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a very exclusive vessel. It's for family. We'll take lots of pictures for you." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. You are not family. Not really. For 3 years, Julian had been the family's polite, quiet, and slightly disappointing appendage. The mid-level architect married to their beautiful daughter. The man with a steady job, but no discernible ambition. No hunger for the status and opulence the Ashworths worshipped. They treated him not with overt hostility, but with a patronizing dismissiveness that was somehow more corrosive. He was a piece of furniture they had to accommodate, a beige armchair in their garishly decorated lives. "Go on, Julian," Marcus gestured impatiently towards the parking lot. "Go find a nice cafe. We'll be back around sunset. Maybe the crew will let you have a look around then, if you ask nicely." The crew, a half-dozen men and women in crisp white uniforms, stood at attention along the deck. They watched the exchange, their faces professionally blank, but Julian could see the flicker of confusion in their eyes. They had been given the charter manifest, the Ashworth family. They had not been given a photograph of the owner. Blake delivered the final shove, not physically, but with a laugh that was sharp and ugly. "Yeah, run along. Don't want to be late for your big project, right? Designing a new, what was it? A carport?" He put his arm around his sister, pulling her further onto the boat, and the family disappeared from view, their laughter echoing back towards the dock. Julian was left standing alone, the scent of salt and diesel in the air. He looked at the yacht, his yacht. He had spent 2 years designing it, another year overseeing its construction in a German shipyard. Every joint, every wire, every piece of polished brass was as familiar to him as his own reflection. He had named it the Serenity because its creation had been his escape, his quiet place away from a world that saw him as small. They thought he was an architect's assistant. They didn't know he was a silent, majority partner in one of the most innovative and successful architectural firms in the world. They thought he was a man of modest means. They didn't know his net worth could buy and sell Marcus Ashworth's entire retirement portfolio 100 times over. They thought they had kicked him off a boat they had chartered. They had no idea they were trespassing in his home. And within the hour, their world, built on the fragile foundations of arrogance and assumption, would be leveled to the ground. I see you there, watching this unfold. It's a frustrating scene, isn't it? The injustice of it stings. Maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life, a time when you were underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. It reminds me that while the details might be different, the feelings are universal. Stick around because the satisfaction you're hoping for, it's coming, and it will be worth the wait. The seeds of this moment on the dock had been planted weeks earlier in the formal, suffocating atmosphere of the Ashworths' dining room. The room was a monument to Eleanor's taste, which favored gold leaf, dark woods, and heavy drapery. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on 19th century aristocratic gloom. Julian sat beside Chloe, a placid island in a turbulent sea of family dynamics. Marcus, at the head of the table, had been holding court all evening, pontificating on the state of the economy, a topic about which he knew just enough to be dangerously misinformed. The problem is a lack of killer instinct in the younger generation, Marcus declared, swirling the wine in his glass. Everyone wants a handout. No one wants to build something for themselves. His gaze flickered to Julian for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of disdain. Julian, who had just that morning finalized the acquisition of a smaller rival firm, a move that would net his company 9 figures in new contracts, simply took a sip of water. Building takes time, Marcus, and a solid foundation. Blake, of course, saw the opening. Speaking of building, Julian, how's that extension going? The one for the dentist? Must be thrilling work, all those walls. It has its challenges, Julian replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. The project he'd mentioned to them was real, a small pro bono job he'd taken on for a free clinic in a low-income neighborhood. He let them believe it was the pinnacle of his professional life. It was his control variable in a long, patient experiment. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hand finding his under the table. Her fingers squeezed, a gesture that was meant to be supportive, but felt more like a plea for him to stay quiet, to absorb the blows. Over the years, her role had morphed from his defender to his manager, her primary job to smooth over the friction between him and her family. She treated his dignity as a negotiable asset. It was then that Marcus made his grand announcement. "To celebrate my 65th birthday," he boomed, beaming, "and to celebrate the success that comes from hard work, I've done something special. I have chartered one of the finest yachts on the coast for a full day. The Serenity." Eleanor clapped her hands together, her diamond bracelets clinking. "Oh, Marcus, how wonderful! I've seen pictures of that yacht. It's magnificent, utterly exclusive." "Only the best," Marcus said, puffing out his chest. "A day on the water, just for us, the family." Again, that subtle, exclusionary emphasis. Later that night, in the quiet sanctuary of their own home, a minimalist masterpiece of glass and steel that Julian had designed, which the Ashworths privately called cold and soulless, Chloe had tried to bridge the chasm. "They don't mean it the way it sounds, Julian," she'd said, her back to him as she removed her jewelry at her vanity. "How exactly do they mean it, Chloe?" His voice was calm, devoid of accusation, but the question hung in the air between them. "They're just from a different world. They measure everyone by, well, by money and status. It's how they're wired. They don't see the real you. The real me is the man you married, the man who sits at their table and endures their insults. The question is, do you see him? And if you do, why do you allow them to treat him that way?" She turned, her face etched with a familiar pain. "What am I supposed to do? Start a war with my own family? They're impossible. You know that. It's easier to just let it go, to keep the peace." "Peace and silence are not the same thing," Julian had said softly. He walked over to his home office, a space that was his alone. The walls were lined with blueprints and architectural awards that the Ashworths had never seen. On his desk, next to a scale model of a breathtaking new civic arts center he was designing for the city of Seoul, was a small, velvet-lined box. He opened it. Inside lay a single, impossibly sleek keycard made of brushed titanium. On its surface, the name, The Serenity, was laser-etched in a clean, elegant font. He had picked it up. The metal was cool and solid in his hand. This was not just a key. It was a symbol of the truth he kept hidden. He had started his career with nothing, fueled by a talent and a drive that Marcus Ashworth couldn't possibly comprehend. He'd faced betrayals early on, partners who tried to steal his designs, clients who tried to cheat him. Those experiences had taught him a valuable lesson. Display your weakness, and you'll learn who has character. Display your strength, and you'll only learn who has greed. He had built his fortune quietly, operating through holding companies and under pseudonyms, creating a fortress of anonymity around his success. He wanted a life and a partner who valued the man, not the assets. He looked at the key card, then back at his wife standing in the doorway. He had thought Chloe was that partner, but her fear of her family's disapproval was a crack in the foundation of their marriage. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that a structure with a compromised foundation could not stand forever. He put the key back in its box, the decision already solidifying in his mind. The day of the charter would not just be a test for the Ashworths, it would be a test for everyone. Back on the dock, the warm sun felt distant. The laughter from the yacht had faded, replaced by the murmur of the family enjoying their champagne on the upper deck. They were already forgetting about him. To them, he was out of sight, and therefore completely out of mind. Julian reached into the pocket of his linen trousers. His fingers closed around the cool, smooth surface of the titanium keycard. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He could feel its weight, its power, its truth. He slid his phone from his other pocket, its screen bright in the sun. He scrolled to a single contact, saved under the name Captain Rostova. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. This was the point of no return. He wasn't a man given to impulsive acts. Every move was considered, every consequence weighed. He had given them 3 years of chances, 3 years of quiet dignity in the face of their casual cruelty. He had hoped Chloe would be the one to build the bridge, to stand up and say, "Enough." But she hadn't, so now he would. He typed a single, simple message. "Initiate." He pressed send. The message was delivered instantly. A few hundred feet away, on the bridge of the Serenity, a phone buzzed. Julian watched the yacht. Nothing happened, not at first. The Ashworths continued to mill about the deck, pointing at the shoreline, their voices carrying faintly over the water. Blake raised his glass in a mock toast towards the dock, a final, parting shot. Julian didn't flinch. He simply slid his phone back into his pocket and stood there, a statue of patience. He was an architect. He knew that before you can build something new, you often have to demolish what is already there, especially if the existing structure is rotten to its core. He cataloged every slight, not with the heat of anger, but with the cold, clear precision of a structural engineer assessing a condemned building. The condescending tone Marcus used when asking about his little job. The way Eleanor would look at his clothes, her lips pursed in a silent critique. The endless, witless jokes from Blake about his income. And Chloe, her pained, apologetic glances that offered comfort but never defense. Each one was a stress fracture, a crack in the facade. For years, he had been patching them over for the sake of peace. No more. He looked up at the bridge of the yacht. A figure had appeared, silhouetted against the bright sky. A woman, standing with her hands on her hips, staring directly at him. Even from this distance, he recognized the formidable posture of Captain Eva Rostova. She was a former officer in the Merchant Marines, a woman who commanded more respect with a single glance than Marcus Ashworth had in his entire life of bluster. She had been his hand-picked choice to command the Serenity. Her only loyalty was to the vessel's true owner, a man she knew only as Mr. Thorne. Julian gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. On the bridge, Captain Rostova lifted a pair of binoculars to her eyes, focusing them on him. The performance was about to begin. The guests were on stage, the audience was in place, and the director, standing quietly on the dock, had just called action. The quiet hum of the yacht's generators seemed to deepen, the only sound in a world holding its breath. The sun was high, the sky was clear, but a storm was about to break. The festive atmosphere on the deck of the Serenity was beginning to curdle. The champagne was still cold, the canapés were still exquisite, but a subtle, unnerving stillness had settled over the vessel. The powerful engines, which should have rumbled to life minutes ago, remained silent. The yacht sat motionless, tethered to the dock like a magnificent, caged beast. Marcus Ashworth's patience, always a shallow reservoir, was empty. He drained his glass of champagne and slammed it down on a teak table with a sharp crack. "What in God's name is the holdup?" he bellowed to no one in particular. "I'm paying a king's ransom for this trip. Let's get this show on the road." He stomped over to a young deckhand who was polishing an already immaculate brass cleat. "You!" Marcus barked, making the young man jump. "Go tell your captain to fire up the engines. The Ashworth family is ready to depart." The deckhand, a boy of no more than 20 with sun-bleached hair, looked flustered. He glanced nervously from Marcus's furious red face towards the bridge, then back towards the dock where Julian still stood, unmoving. "Sir, the captain—" She gave orders to wait. "Wait for what?" Blake chimed in, swaggering over. "Did someone forget the caviar? We can't possibly leave without the caviar." He laughed, but the sound was brittle. The joke didn't land. The unease was palpable now, a low-frequency hum beneath the cheerful chatter. Eleanor fanned herself with a folded napkin. "Marcus, do something," she urged, her voice tight. "We look like fools just sitting here. What will people think?" Her world was a stage, and the only tragedy she could imagine was a poor performance. Chloe was the quietest of all. She stood by the railing, her knuckles white as she gripped it. She wasn't looking at her fuming father or her sneering brother. Her gaze was fixed on the lone figure on the dock. Her husband. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching them. The space between the yacht and the shore seemed to widen with every passing second, becoming a vast, unbridgeable chasm. A knot of pure dread, cold and heavy, was tightening in her stomach. She had a terrible, sinking feeling that this was not a simple delay. This was something else. This was a reckoning. Julian on the dock felt their agitation like a change in barometric pressure. He could see it in their stiff postures, their sharp, jerky movements. He allowed the moment to stretch, to ripen. He wanted them to feel the full weight of their own impotence. They were so accustomed to the world bending to their will, to their money, and their name clearing every path. The simple, immovable fact that the boat was not moving was an affront to their very existence. He saw Captain Rostova on the bridge, binoculars still trained on him. She was waiting for his next signal. Their plan, conceived weeks ago, was simple, elegant, and cruel in its precision. It was designed not just to reveal a truth, but to dismantle a lie. The lie the Ashworths had built their identities upon, that their wealth equated to power, and their status equated to worth. Slowly, deliberately, Julian slid the titanium keycard from his pocket. He didn't brandish it. He simply held it in the palm of his hand, letting the sun catch its metallic surface. It was a small object, almost insignificant, but in this drama, it was the gun in the first act. He turned it over and over with his thumb, the motion calm and meditative. He was an architect, and he appreciated the power of a keystone, the small central piece that holds the entire structure together. and he knew better than anyone what happens when that keystone is removed. On the yacht, Marcus's frustration boiled over. He was no longer trying to get a deckhand's attention. He was marching towards the stairs that led to the bridge, his face a mask of indignation. This is unacceptable. I'm going to have a word with this captain myself. I'll have her job for this incompetence. As his foot hit the first step, a voice, amplified and impossibly clear, crackled through the yacht's state-of-the-art sound system. It was a woman's voice, calm, authoritative, and laced with steel. It was Captain Rostova. "Attention, guests," the voice announced, cutting through the air and silencing every conversation. "Please remain on the main deck. There will be a brief delay in our departure." Marcus stopped, his hand on the railing, and looked up towards the bridge. "A brief delay?" he roared. "We've been waiting for 20 minutes. What is the meaning of this?" The disembodied voice continued, ignoring him completely, as if he were nothing more than static. "There appears to be a significant misunderstanding regarding the terms of today's charter." A chill, colder than the sea breeze, swept across the deck. The quiet before the storm had just ended. The first clap of thunder had arrived. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the deck of the Serenity. The Ashworths and their small party of sycophantic friends froze in place, champagne flutes hovering halfway to their lips. All eyes turned towards the source of the amplified voice, the unseen captain on the bridge. Marcus was the first to recover, his indignation momentarily overriding his confusion. "No misunderstanding," he bellowed at the intercom speaker as if it were a person. "I am Marcus Ashworth. The charter was booked and paid for weeks ago. My assistant has the confirmation." He was a man whose power was transactional. If he had paid, he was in control. The idea that his money was not speaking was incomprehensible. Captain Rostova's voice returned, as calm and unyielding as the tide. "With all due respect, Mr. Ashworth, your payment was for a provisional booking. All charters are subject to final confirmation by the vessel's owner." There was a perfectly timed pause, letting the weight of the word owner settle. "That confirmation has been denied." Denied. The word hung in the air, a stunning violation of their expectations. "Denied?" Eleanor whispered, her hand flying to her chest. "But why?" Blake let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This is ridiculous. It's a mistake, some clerical error." He looked around for agreement, his usual cocksure grin faltering at the edges. The captain's voice cut him off. "There is no mistake, sir." Another pause, this one even more devastating. "The owner of this vessel is currently on the dock. We will not be departing until he is aboard and personally gives the order to cast off." Every head on the deck swiveled in unison, a synchronized movement of disbelief. They all stared down at the dock, at the lone, quiet figure standing there, at Julian. The cognitive dissonance was so profound it was almost comical. The Ashworths looked from the magnificent multi-million-dollar yacht to the unassuming man in the simple loafers and linen trousers, and their brains simply refused to connect the two. Blake was the first to voice the absurdity. He pointed a trembling finger at Julian and burst out laughing, a sound that was high-pitched and bordering on hysterical. "The owner? You mean him? Julian?" He turned to the others, his eyes wide with manic glee. "This captain is insane. He's an architect's assistant. He probably owns a rowboat with a leaky bottom, not this." Eleanor managed a weak titter, trying to reclaim the sense of social superiority that was rapidly slipping from her grasp. "It's clearly a prank, a very strange, unfunny prank. Julian, tell them to stop this nonsense at once," she commanded, her voice wavering. But Julian didn't respond to her. He didn't even look at her. He simply began to walk. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace towards the gangplank, the same gangplank he had been shooed away from just minutes before. The two crew members who had stood guard at the bottom, their faces grimly apologetic, now seemed to snap to attention. As Julian approached, they parted for him as if he were royalty, their expressions transforming from confusion to a dawning, profound respect. One of them subtly inclined his head. Julian ascended the gangplank, his footsteps making a soft, steady rhythm on the ramp. The sound seemed to echo in the dead silence. At the top, on the pristine deck, Captain Eva Rostova was waiting for him. She was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. In her crisp white uniform, she was the very picture of competence and authority. She gave a sharp, formal nod as he stepped aboard. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and respectful, using the discreet surname he used for all his private holdings. "My apologies for the delay in your boarding. We had some unexpected passengers to manage." "It's not your fault, Captain," Julian replied, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the deck. "The guests were just getting settled in." He turned then to face the Ashworth family. They were a tableau of shock, their faces frozen in masks of disbelief, anger, and a dawning, sickening horror. Marcus's jaw was slack, his florid face drained of color. Eleanor looked as if she might faint. Blake's mocking grin was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. And Chloe. She stood slightly apart from them, her face pale, her eyes locked on her husband. In her gaze there was no anger, no confusion. There was only the devastating, soul-crushing light of understanding. Julian's eyes met hers for a brief second, and for the first time that day, a flicker of his own profound pain was visible. Then, his expression hardened back into a mask of cool composure. He slowly raised his hand, the one holding the titanium keycard. He held it up for them all to see, the sun glinting off its surface. "Marcus," he said, his voice as level and precise as a laser. "You said the guest list was exclusive. You were right." He turned his gaze to Blake, whose face was now ashen. "You asked if I was out of my depth. An interesting question to ask the man who designed and commissioned the very ground you're standing on." The statement landed, simple, devastating, final. The collective intake of breath on the deck was audible. The truth, so long hidden, had finally been brought into the light, and its glare was blinding. The quiet, disappointing architect's assistant was gone. In his place stood Mr. Thorne, the owner of the Serenity and the architect of their imminent humiliation. The silence that followed Julian's revelation was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering the sea breeze. It was the sound of a world being turned upside down. The Ashworth's entire reality, a carefully constructed edifice of status, wealth, and social superiority, had just been demolished by a single, quiet statement. Marcus was the first to find his voice, though it was a reedy, sputtering version of his usual boom. "Julian, what is this? This is some kind of elaborate joke, isn't it? A prank you cooked up with a charter company?" He looked around, desperate for anyone to validate this theory. "Very funny. You had us going for a minute there. Now enough is enough." Julian's gaze, cold and unblinking, settled on his father-in-law. "A joke? Was it a joke, Marcus, when you advised Chloe to get a prenuptial agreement because you were worried I would be a drain on her potential?" Marcus flinched as if struck. "Was it a prank?" Julian continued, his voice never rising, yet cutting deeper than any shout. "When you loudly announced at my own 30th birthday dinner that you hoped I'd finally get a real job with some upward mobility." He took a step closer, his presence seeming to expand, filling the space. "For 3 years, I have sat at your table. I have attended your family functions. I have listened patiently while you and your son have openly mocked my work, questioned my ambition, and belittled my worth. You judged the book by a cover I intentionally designed to be simple, because I wanted to see if you were capable of reading the pages. You are not." His attention shifted to Eleanor, who was clutching her husband's arm, her knuckles white. "Eleanor, You have always been so concerned with appearances, with how things look. So let me ask you, how does this look? A family so blinded by their own arrogance that they try to kick one of their own off a vessel he owns. How will that story play at the country club? Eleanor's face crumpled, the carefully maintained mask of aristocratic poise shattering into a million pieces. Then Julian's eyes found Blake. The younger man, who had built his identity on a foundation of smug superiority, seemed to shrink under the weight of Julian's stare. He tried to muster his usual bravado, but it came out as a weak, pathetic bleat. "Hey, man, come on," Blake stammered, holding up his hands in a gesture of placation. "It was just, hazing, a bit of fun. We were just giving you a hard time, like guys do." Julian's expression didn't soften. It hardened into something resembling granite. "Fun?" he repeated, the words sharp and clinical. "Let's catalog the fun, shall we?" He began to pace slowly, his footsteps the only sound. This was the list of grievances, the accounting of 1,000 tiny cuts. "Was it fun when you told your university friends that Chloe had married her charity case? I was at the next table, Blake. You just didn't see me." Blake's face went from ashen to a ghastly shade of green. "Was it fun?" Julian continued, his voice relentless. "When you accidentally spilled an entire glass of red wine on the one decent suit I wore to your parents' anniversary party. You laughed about it with your friends later, saying I'd have to work a month to replace it. Or so you thought." He paused, letting the memory hang in the air. "That suit, by the way, was a Tom Ford. The replacement cost less than the interest I earn in an hour." He stopped directly in front of Blake, who was now visibly trembling. "And was it fun, just 10 minutes ago, when you laughed and told me I was out of my depth? Tell me, Blake, standing here on my deck, on my yacht, which of us is out of his depth now?" Blake couldn't answer. He could only stare, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, Julian's gaze swept over all of them, the entire stunned assembly of Ashworths and their friends. His eyes were devoid of heat, of anger. All that was left was a profound, chilling disappointment. "You don't value family," he said, his voice dropping to an almost whisper, forcing them to lean in to hear their sentence. "You value accessories. You saw Chloe as an accomplishment, and you saw me as a disappointing accessory that came with her. You never once tried to know me. You only tried to measure me, and you used a broken ruler." He turned his back on them then, a gesture of finality more powerful than any outburst. He faced the open sea for a moment before turning to his captain. "Captain Rostova," he said, his voice now crisp and decisive, "please have the Ashworth family's personal belongings gathered and brought to the gangplank." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Panic, raw and undisguised, erupted on the deck. "Their charter," Julian added, looking back at Marcus's horrified face, "has been terminated." The finality of Julian's decree shattered the paralysis that had gripped the Ashworths. Raw, primal panic took its place. The carefully constructed artifice of their lives was being dismantled before their eyes, and they began to scramble amidst the wreckage. Eleanor was the first to break completely. The mask of the society matriarch dissolved, revealing the desperate, terrified woman beneath. "Julian, no!" she cried, her voice shrill with hysteria. She rushed forward, her silk caftan tangling around her legs. "Please, you can't do this. Think of Chloe. Think of the family. This is a mistake. We're sorry, we're so dreadfully sorry." Her apology was a torrent of words, born not of remorse, but of sheer terror at the social annihilation she was facing. Marcus, recovering from his initial shock, attempted to reclaim his authority through sheer bluster. He puffed up his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Now see here, Julian," he roared, pointing a trembling finger. You can't just throw us off. This is my birthday celebration. We have guests." Julian didn't even turn to face him fully. He simply interrupted him, his voice slicing through Marcus's tirade with surgical precision. "I can," he said, the two words delivered with an absolute, unshakable certainty. "And I will." The bluster died in Marcus's throat, choked off by the undeniable power in Julian's voice. This wasn't the quiet, accommodating boy who married his daughter. This was a man he didn't know at all, a man who held all the cards. Blake, meanwhile, tried a different approach, one born of the transactional world he lived in. He scurried over to Julian, his face a desperate mask of conciliation. "Julian, buddy, Mr. Thorne, listen. Okay, we get it. You're the big man. You're the owner. Point taken. We messed up. We were jerks. But this is my dad's 65th. Let us just have the afternoon. We'll pay. We'll pay double the charter fee. Triple. Just name a price." Julian finally turned to look at Blake, and his expression was one of genuine pity. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said softly. "You think this is about money. You think you can buy your way out of a consequence. This has never been about money. It's about respect. And respect, Blake, is not for sale. It's earned. And you are bankrupt." Defeated, Blake stumbled back, the last of his strategies exhausted. The family stood together, a huddled, pathetic group, as the crew members, their faces impassive, began quietly and efficiently gathering their designer handbags, their sweaters, and their gift bags. Then, Julian did the one thing that turned the knife. He turned to the one person who had been silent through it all, his wife. Chloe stood frozen by the railing, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She was trapped in the no-man's land between the family she was born into and the man she had chosen. Julian's voice, when he spoke to her, was different. The cold, hard edge was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound sorrow. "Chloe," he said, and her name was the only thing he needed to say to draw every ounce of her attention. She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "The captain asked who was on the guest list," he continued, his voice steady. "Right now that list has one name on it, mine." He paused, letting the weight of his next words fill the space between them. "But I am willing to add a second. The choice is yours. You can stay on this yacht with your husband, or you can walk down that gangplank with the family you chose not to correct." The ultimatum was absolute. There was no middle ground, no negotiation. He was forcing her to do the one thing she had spent 3 years avoiding, to make a stand, to choose. The sea breeze whipped around them, pulling at Chloe's hair. The sun beat down on the deck. Her mother was whispering her name, a desperate, pleading sound. Her father was staring at her, his face a mixture of hope and command. Her brother looked at her with pure, selfish need. They were all pulling at her, demanding her loyalty, the loyalty she had always given them by default. And then there was Julian. He wasn't pulling. He was just standing there, resolute and waiting. He was offering her a choice, but he was also showing her the consequences of her past inaction. He was offering her a future, but only if she was willing to leave her past on the dock. The silence stretched for an eternity. The fate of their marriage, the future of the Ashworth family, all of it hung suspended in this single, agonizing moment of decision. Chloe looked from her family's desperate faces to her husband's quiet, expectant one. Her entire life had led to this point, to this gangplank, to this choice. Chloe's world had been reduced to the few yards of pristine teak deck that separated her family from her husband. On one side stood the past, her loud, demanding, arrogant family, their faces now twisted in a desperate plea. They represented the life she knew, the toxic, suffocating comfort of familiar dysfunction. They were the architects of her weakness, the enablers of her silence. On the other side stood Julian. He was the future, an unknown territory. He was a man she was realizing she barely knew, a man of hidden depths and quiet, formidable strength. He wasn't pleading or demanding. He was simply waiting, his presence a silent testament to the standard he was now setting. He was offering not just a place on his yacht, but a place in a life built on truth. Tears streamed down Chloe's face, but they were no longer tears of helplessness. They were tears of grief for the woman she had been, and of terror and hope for the woman she might become. Her mother's whisper grew more insistent. "Chloe, darling, come with us. You're an Ashworth." Her father's voice was a low growl. "Chloe, don't you dare side with him against your own blood." But she wasn't listening to them anymore. She was looking at Julian, truly looking at him. She saw the years of patient endurance in his eyes. She saw the deep hurt she had inflicted with her silence, a wound far deeper than any of her family's insults. And she saw the flicker of hope he was still holding out for her, a final, fragile chance. In that moment, she understood. To walk down that gangplank with her family would be the end of her marriage, but to stay would be the end of her life as a coward. She took a single, shuddering breath. Then she took a step. It was a small movement, but on that silent deck, it was seismic. She stepped away from her family and towards her husband. Eleanor let out a small, wounded gasp. Marcus's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. Chloe took another step, her eyes never leaving Julian's. She walked past her brother's shocked, disbelieving face. She walked past her father, refusing to meet his glare. She walked past her mother's outstretched, pleading hand, and she did not take it. She stopped directly in front of Julian, close enough to see the intricate flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, but clear in its sincerity. "I was a coward. I was so afraid of their disapproval, so desperate for their acceptance, that I let them diminish you. And in letting them diminish you, I diminished myself. I became one of them." Her eyes fell to the deck. "I don't deserve to stay here. I don't deserve your forgiveness." She looked up at him, her gaze raw and open. "But I choose you. If you'll have me, I choose this. I choose you." Julian watched her, his expression unreadable for a long moment. The fate of their life together hung on his response. Slowly, the hard lines of his face began to soften. The cold, architectural precision in his eyes warmed with a flicker of the love that had been buried under years of disappointment. He didn't smile, but the tension in his jaw eased. He gave a single, small nod. It was enough. It was everything. He then turned his gaze back to the Ashworths, his face once again a mask of cool authority. "You heard my wife," he said, the words, "my wife," delivered with a quiet, protective emphasis. "The guest list is now final." He gestured with his chin towards the gangplank. "You wanted a day of luxury to celebrate your status. Instead, you have received a lesson in character. Your belongings are on the dock. You may leave." There were no more arguments, no more blustering or pleading. They were utterly, comprehensively defeated. The fight had gone out of them, replaced by a hollow, echoing shame. In complete silence led by a stony-faced Marcus, the Ashworth family and their remaining guests walked the long, humiliating path down the gangplank. They were now the ones being shooed off, the ones deemed unworthy. The reversal was absolute, a perfect, brutal symmetry. As they stepped onto the dock, Julian spoke one last time, his voice carrying clearly over the water. "Marcus, my firm is a primary benefactor of the city's new Civic Arts Center. I sit on the board. Your application for the naming rights to the main gallery, which I believe you submitted last week, consider it withdrawn." Marcus stopped dead, his back ramrod straight. He didn't turn around. He simply stood there for a moment, absorbing this final, devastating blow, before continuing his walk of shame. The crew cast off the lines. The great engines of the Serenity finally rumbled to life, a deep, powerful thrum. The yacht began to pull away from the dock, leaving the small, diminished figures of the Ashworth family standing there, watching their world sail away without them. On the deck, Julian and Chloe stood together, the wind whipping around them, the open sea before them. The silence between them was no longer one of conflict, but of fragile, uncertain possibility. The demolition was complete. Now the difficult work of rebuilding could begin. The days that followed were filled with a profound and unnerving quiet. The open sea was a vast blue canvas upon which Julian and Chloe began to repaint their marriage. They sailed south, with no destination in mind but the truth. The yacht, the Serenity, became a floating confessional, a sanctuary where the silence was finally filled with the words that had been left unsaid for years. They talked for hours on the sun-drenched decks and in the cool, quiet evenings in the main salon. Julian, for the first time, laid bare the architecture of his life. He spoke of his early career, of a brilliant partnership with a friend who, blinded by greed, had tried to steal his designs and ruin him. That betrayal had been the crucible in which his philosophy was forged. "I built walls," he explained one evening, as they watched the stars emerge in a sky unsullied by city lights. "Not out of fear, but as a diagnostic tool. I wanted to build a life, a real life, with people who valued the foundation, not the facade. I let people think I was just a draftsman, a man of simple means, because I needed to know if they could see the person behind the profession. Your family, they failed the test spectacularly." Chloe listened, her heart aching with the weight of her own complicity. When it was her turn, she did not make excuses. She confessed her deep-seated insecurities, her lifelong feeling of being a disappointment to a father who only valued strength and a mother who only valued status. "I was so terrified of their judgment," she said, her voice thick with shame. "That fear was the background noise of my entire life. When they started in on you, it was easier to try and quiet you down than to stand up to them. It was cowardly. I let my fear of them be bigger than my love for you, and that is a failure I will have to live with." There was no instant forgiveness. Julian's wounds were too deep for that. But there was understanding. He saw that her weakness was not born of malice, but of a fear that had been conditioned into her since childhood. He had demanded she tear down a structure she didn't even know how to begin dismantling. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to lay a new foundation, one built not on assumptions and appearances, but on brutal, painful honesty. He showed her his work, the real work. He unrolled blueprints for skyscrapers that reshape skylines, for hospitals in developing nations, for the breathtaking civic arts center he had mentioned to her father. She saw the genius he had hidden, the passion he had muted, and she fell in love with him all over again. This time with the real man, not the edited version she had tried to fit into her family's narrow world. News from that world trickled in. The story of the humiliation on the dock, as all such delicious scandals do, had spread like wildfire through the Ashworths' social circle. Marcus, a man who lived and died by his reputation, became a laughingstock. The tale was told with relish at the country club bar and over polite luncheons. The great Marcus Ashworth kicked off a yacht by his meek son-in-law. His bluster was revealed as hollow, his status a fragile veneer. The withdrawal of his bid for the gallery naming rights was a public and permanent symbol of his fall from grace. Blake faced his own consequences. The fun he'd had at Julian's expense proved costly. A major client of his investment firm, a quiet tech billionaire who happened to be a close friend and admirer of Mr. Thorne's architectural work, got wind of the story. The client pulled his entire 9-figure portfolio from Blake's management, citing a crisis of character in a tersely worded letter. The loss was catastrophic for Blake, not just financially but to his ego, the only real asset he had. Eleanor, stripped of her social standing, retreated into her gloomy, gold-leafed house, the curtains drawn. Her world, once a stage for her to perform on, had become a prison. The Ashworths were not destroyed, but they were irrevocably diminished. Their arrogance had been a balloon, and Julian had not popped it with a cannon, but had pricked it with a pin, allowing it to deflate slowly, wheezing its way back down to earth. The justice was poetic. They who had lived by superficial judgment were undone by it. Months later, Julian and Chloe stood on the wide, cantilevered balcony of a new house, a stunning creation of glass, wood, and stone that seemed to grow organically from a cliffside overlooking the Pacific. He had designed it for them. It was a home with no hidden rooms, no secret spaces. Everything was open, honest, and filled with light. The serenity was anchored in the cove below, a silvery shape on the dark water. Chloe leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked softly. Julian was quiet for a moment, considering it. "Change is a choice, Chloe. It requires demolishing your own ego to make room for humility. That's the hardest renovation project there is. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But their choices are no longer our concern." He was right. Their chapter with the Ashworths was closed. Their own story, the real one, was just beginning. The foundation was set. It was strong. It was true. And it was ready to be built upon together. And so a structure built on lies had to be demolished to make way for one built on truth. It's a powerful lesson, isn't it? That true strength isn't about what you show the world, but about the integrity you maintain when no one is watching. It's about having the patience to wait for the right moment and the courage to act when that moment arrives. What did you think of the choice Chloe made? Was it enough to earn her redemption? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. It's in these discussions that the story truly comes to life. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this journey from frustration to vindication, please give this story a like and consider subscribing for more tales of hidden strengths and deserved reckonings. Until next time, remember that the most impressive structures are not always the ones that are the most visible. They are the ones with the strongest foundations.